a grand wedding in full swing, the entire village buzzing with excitement. The bride, Adana, glowed in her finest attire, every bead and fabric a testament to the love and care poured into the day. The groom, Chijioke, stood tall and confident, the pride of his family. The air was filled with the rhythmic beats of traditional drumming, laughter spilling over like champagne, and the aroma of delicacies prepared for the feast. It was a day destined to be remembered. But just as the officiant was about to ask the pivotal question, a voice cut through the joy like a blade. "This wedding is a lie." The room froze, a collective gasp rippling through the crowd. Eyes darted, hearts raced, and in that moment, everything changed. This was no ordinary celebration. In the heart of Lagos, Nigeria, Adana and Chijioke's union had been hailed as the event of the year. Their love story was envied, their families respected, and their future together seemed like a fairy tale. Guests from far and wide had gathered, their vibrant attires creating a sea of color and energy. The anticipation in the air was palpable, as if the entire world had paused to witness this union. But behind the smiles and grand gestures, the storm clouds of truth were gathering, unseen by most. And then the unthinkable happened. A girl, barely noticeable at first, stepped forward, her voice trembling yet firm. The shock on her face mirrored the chaos her words would unleash. Who was she? What did she know that could turn this perfect day into a moment of reckoning? The whispers began, the tension thickened, and the fairy tale cracked at its seams. The answer to those questions would unravel a web of deceit that no one, not even the couple at the altar, could have anticipated. The sun shone brightly over the village, casting a golden glow on what was supposed to be the happiest day of Adana and Chijioke's lives. Adana, the beloved daughter of the Okoro family, stood like a queen in her flowing white gown. She wasn't just beautiful, she was wise, kind, and admired by all. Chijioke, her groom, was the perfect match. A rising star in the city, he had built a name for himself as a wealthy entrepreneur. His charming smile and smooth words could win anyone over. Together, they were seen as a power couple, destined for greatness. The wedding was a spectacle of joy. Traditional drums filled the air with their rhythm, and the vibrant attire of the guests created a sea of colors. There were mountains of food that could feed the entire village twice over, and laughter rippled through the crowd like waves. People had traveled far and wide to witness the union of these two prominent families. The atmosphere was buzzing with excitement, a perfect blend of tradition and celebration. But amidst the joy and laughter, there was an unsettling presence. At the very back of the hall stood a young woman, dressed plainly, her face shadowed by a mix of fear and determination. Her eyes never left Chijioke. She clutched her hands tightly, her knuckles white, as if bracing herself for what she had to do. While everyone else danced and celebrated, she stood still, unnoticed by the crowd. The ceremony moved forward, the officiant's voice carrying over the chatter as he began the sacred vows. When he turned to Chijioke and asked if he would take Adana as his wife, there was a brief pause. Then, before Chijioke could answer, a voice broke through the silence like a thunderclap. "Wait! This wedding cannot happen." The drums stopped abruptly, and the hall fell silent. Every head turned toward the back of the room. The young woman stepped forward, her face pale, but her voice steady. The festive air vanished in an instant, replaced by a tension so thick it was almost tangible. This was the moment everything began to unravel. The hall, once alive with music and laughter, now fell silent as all eyes turned to the young woman who had interrupted the ceremony. She looked terrified, yet determined, like someone standing on the edge of a cliff, but refusing to step back. Her name was Nkechi, and her presence alone changed the entire mood of the day. Unlike the guests, who were dressed in elaborate traditional attire, Nkechi wore a plain dress, her face devoid of makeup. She seemed out of place, but her voice carried an undeniable authority as she declared, "This wedding is a lie." The crowd erupted into a storm of gasps and murmurs. People craned their necks, whispering questions and speculations to each other. Adana's father, a man known for his composed demeanor, shot to his feet. His face was a blend of confusion and anger, his hands clenched at his sides. Adana herself looked frozen in time, her bouquet trembling in her grip. Her wide eyes darted between Nkechi and Chijioke, silently pleading for an explanation. Nkechi's voice trembled as she stepped closer, but her resolve didn't waver. "Chijioke is not who you think he is," she said, her tone laced with pain and betrayal. "He lied to all of you. He lied to me. And I won't let him lie to Adana too. The weight of her words hung heavy in the air, like a storm cloud ready to burst. Chijioke's face turned a deep shade of red, and he took a step forward, his voice rising above the murmurs. "What nonsense is this?" he shouted, his tone a mix of anger and desperation. "Who even are you?" But his eyes betrayed him. His panic was unmistakable. He knew exactly who Nkechi was, even if he pretended otherwise. Nkechi wasn't fooled. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she reached into her bag. "Don't act like you don't know me," she said, her voice steady now. From her phone, she displayed messages, pictures, and videos, undeniable proof of a 2-year-long relationship with Chijioke. Photos of them together, texts filled with promises of love, and even plans they had made for the future. The crowd erupted into chaos. Whispers turned into loud exclamations, and some guests began shaking their heads in disbelief. The perfect groom they had all admired was now exposed as a liar. Chijioke, the man who had stood so confidently before the crowd moments ago, now looked like a cornered animal, his polished image crumbling before everyone's eyes. Adana stared at the evidence, her face pale, her hands gripping her bouquet so tightly that the flowers began to crush under the pressure. The day that had started as her dream wedding was quickly becoming a nightmare, and there was no escape from the storm Nkechi had unleashed. Nkechi's heart pounded in her chest as she stepped forward, her eyes locked on Chijioke. "I need you all to hear this," she began, her voice trembling but resolute. "I met Chijioke a few years ago, when he was still working his way up. He was ambitious, driven, and he promised me that when he became successful, when his life was stable, we would get married." Her eyes flicked to Adana, her heart aching for her. "I believed him. I was in love with him." Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She needed to speak the truth, no matter how painful. "We built a life in my head, a future. He made me think I was his one and only. I was always there for him, supporting his dreams, believing in him." She swallowed hard, the ache in her chest intensifying. "And then, I found out he was engaged to you, Adana. I found out not because he told me, but because I overheard someone else talking about it. He never said a word to me." She paused, her breath coming in shallow gasps. "I had no idea he was planning a wedding with you. No idea that all along, while I was dreaming of our future together, he was lying to me, lying to you, lying to all of us." The silence in the room was deafening. Every eye was on her now, and she could feel the weight of their gazes. Adana stood frozen, her skin pale, her lips trembling as she looked at Chijioke. Her hand instinctively tightened around her bouquet, the vibrant colors of the flowers stark against the growing sense of despair. "Is it true?" Adana's voice was barely above a whisper. The pain and confusion in her words were clear, and for a moment, she seemed as though she might collapse under the weight of it all. "Chijioke, is this true?" Chijioke's face drained of color. For a moment, he said nothing. His mind raced, trying to find the right words to undo the damage, but his thoughts seemed scattered, like a house of cards crumbling under pressure. He stepped forward, his voice rising in an attempt to control the situation. "What nonsense is this?" Chijioke spat, trying to sound angry, to regain control of the moment. His eyes darted to Nkechi, then to the guests, and back to Adana. "Nkechi is lying. She's just trying to ruin everything. Don't listen to her." His voice wavered at the end, betraying his fear. "She's just bitter, trying to cause trouble. This isn't true." But the crowd wasn't buying it. They had seen his panic, heard his trembling voice, and the uncertainty in their eyes was unmistakable. Nkechi pulled out her phone, her hands shaking as she showed the messages and pictures. They were intimate, filled with promises Chijioke had made to her, messages of love, planning, even photos from trips they had taken together. The evidence was undeniable. "Look at this," Nkechi said, her voice shaking but clear. "This is the truth. We've been together for 2 years, and he never told me about Adana. He never mentioned you, Adana. He kept it all from me, all while pretending to be someone he wasn't. This isn't just a misunderstanding. This is a betrayal." The murmurs in the room grew louder, rippling through the crowd as people whispered among themselves, glancing at Chijioke with newfound suspicion. His closest friends, the ones who had stood by him for years, now looked uncomfortable, exchanging uneasy glances. The man they had once admired, The man they had thought was perfect was now exposed for who he truly was. Adana's eyes didn't leave Chijioke. She had hoped, for just a moment, that he would explain himself, that he would reassure her, tell her it was all a mistake. But his stammering denials and the undeniable proof before her crushed those hopes. Nkechi, still holding her phone, took a deep breath. "I didn't come here to ruin your day, Adana," she said softly, her voice filled with empathy and sorrow. "But you deserve the truth. You deserve to know who Chijioke really is. He doesn't deserve you. He doesn't deserve any of us. He played both of us, and I can't just stand by and let him marry you when I know the truth." Her words hit like a hammer. The pain in her voice, the hurt in her eyes. It was clear she wasn't just seeking revenge. She was exposing the truth for all to see. Chijioke, in his desperation, tried to salvage what was left. "Nkechi is just trying to ruin this, trying to destroy what we have," he insisted, his voice becoming more frantic. "She's crazy. Don't believe her." He turned to the guests, trying to appeal to them, to convince them that this was all some kind of elaborate trick. "This isn't real. It's all lies." But the more he spoke, the less convincing he seemed. His friends no longer looked at him with admiration, and the guests who had once been there to celebrate his love with Adana now stood uncertain, their loyalties divided. They had seen the evidence, heard the hurt in Nkechi's voice, and the more they thought about it, the more they realized that Chijioke's facade was crumbling. Adana's heart shattered as she stared at him. The man she thought she would spend her life with, the man who had promised her forever, was a lie. The dreams she had built around their life together, the love she had invested, were slipping through her fingers. The weight of it all was unbearable. This wasn't the wedding she had imagined. It wasn't the future she had dreamed of. And now, nothing would ever be the same again. Adana stood at the center of the room, her hands trembling but her head held high. Tears glistened in her eyes, but her voice was steady as she spoke. "This wedding is over." The room went silent, and for a moment, no one moved. Then, the murmurs began, growing louder as the guests exchanged shocked glances and whispered about the scandal unfolding before their eyes. Slowly, people started to leave. The once joyous atmosphere was now heavy with disbelief and tension. The decorations, the music, and the untouched feast all seemed meaningless now, mere remnants of a celebration that would never happen. Chijioke stood frozen in place, his face pale and his hands clenched at his sides. He tried to speak, but no words came out. The weight of the accusations and the undeniable evidence had silenced him. As Adana turned away from him, her family rushed to her side, their expressions a mix of sadness and fierce support. She handed her bouquet to her mother and walked out of the hall with measured steps, refusing to look back. In the corner of the hall, Nkechi stood quietly, watching the scene she had set into motion. Her heart felt heavy, but there was also a strange sense of relief. She had spoken her truth, no matter the cost. As the crowd continued to disperse, she turned to leave, her steps slow and deliberate. Her eyes brimmed with unshed tears, but she refused to let them fall. Every step away from the venue felt like shedding the weight of lies and betrayal. She had loved Chijioke once, but now she loved herself enough to walk away with her dignity intact. The scandal spread quickly through the village. Chijioke, once admired as a successful and charming man, became the subject of gossip and judgment. People who had once praised him now questioned his character. His business began to suffer as clients distanced themselves, unwilling to associate with someone whose name was now tainted. He tried to salvage what was left of his reputation, but the damage was done. Adana, meanwhile, found strength in the love and support of her family and friends. Though her heart was broken, she knew she had escaped a life built on lies. Each day, she grew stronger, finding comfort in small moments and the realization that she deserved better. Sitting with her sister one evening, she whispered to herself, "This is not the end for me. I will rise above this." With time, her pain turned into determination, and she began to rebuild her life, vowing never to settle for anything less than the truth and respect she deserved. Sometimes, life teaches us lessons in the most unexpected ways. Adana and Nkechi's journey wasn't just about heartbreak. It was about finding strength in moments of betrayal and choosing dignity over deception. Their courage to face the truth, even when it hurt, reminds us that standing up for ourselves is never a mistake. What would you do if you found yourself in their situation? Would you have the strength to walk away or the bravery to speak up? Let us know in the comments below. And if this tale struck a chord with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that make you pause and reflect.